guys, I know it's been a long time, but I think it's about time that we update this channel here, put up a new little presentation for you again, just going through some of the highlights of the presentation you guys saw in class the other day, and if you were absent, well, that's why this video is here for you. Today we're going to be talking about Marbury versus Madison and the idea that is judicial review. You got to understand, basically in Chapter 9, if you remember, we were talking about the Judiciary Act, and that really was something that essentially Congress and Washington sort of put together that established what exactly the job was going to be of the Supreme Court. You know, I joked with you guys saying that the Supreme Court was really kind of unsure about what their role was going to be in American government prior to this act. Yeah, they were judges, and they knew that they were sort of the highest court in the land, but what exactly was their capacity? And that shouldn't sound too awful strange to you either, because the reality is, even when George Washington stepped in as president, there'd never been a president here before. What exactly was it that he was supposed to do? So, let's start with the basics. Okay, you guys know we talked about the election of 1800. We talked about it an awful lot. That was the little mini revolution. The Federalists are going to lose power here in this country for the first time, and Thomas Jefferson comes to become the new president. He has unseated Adams. Adams was unsuccessful in securing a second term as president. So Adams is very upset. He's a little worried that this Jefferson dude is going to come in and undo everything that he worked so hard for as president of the United States. So he thinks and thinks and thinks, and he comes up with this idea. At least maybe he can ensure that Federalist ideas continue to grow here in this country. So he decides to appoint a whole lot of Federalist-thinking judges to the courts throughout the land. These are known as midnight judges because they are basically going to be created in the very final hours here of Adams' presidency, the midnight hour, so to speak. The only trick to these appointments is they have to be delivered by hand. This is John Marshall. Marshall was Adams' Secretary of State, and basically you've got a picture Adams saying to him, I've got a job for you. I need you to hand out all of these federal appointments, and when that job is done, I have one special appointment reserved for you. You will become the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So it's quite an honor. This is going to be a job that, you know, Marshall will be able to serve in full capacity for the rest of his life until he's ready to step down. So Marshall does his very best to hand out all of these appointments, but he does run out of time, and he doesn't hand out absolutely every one of these federal appointments. Now, this is William Marbury. William Marbury was supposed to receive a judgeship from Adams and Marshall, but this is one of the guys that Marshall does not get the judge-appointed letter to him in time. So, unfortunately, Marbury is out. Now, Jefferson takes over, and I want you to sort of try to imagine Jefferson comes into the White House, and he sits down at the desk. He's liking the big desk, and he sees sitting there on the desk a stack of these these appointments that should have been handed to the judges just sitting here on the desk, and it doesn't take long. I mean, Jefferson's a bright guy. He realizes what Adams was up to. He's like, that little skunk was trying to appoint all these Federalist-thinking judges in all the courts in the land to ensure that Federalist judges will make decisions that are Federalist-like. So he turns around to his Secretary of State and says, okay, Madison, who, by the way, is going to be the fourth President of the United States, and says, I'm a little upset right now. What I need you to do is I need you to throw these judicial appointments away. Now, that's exactly what he does. He's trying to keep his president happy, so he tosses out the federal appointments that were created by Adams. And, Marbury's upset when he hears that his federal appointment is thrown out. Marbury's not a fool either. Marbury's a very intelligent man. So Marbury sets the task of, how am I going to get my job that I should have gotten? And he goes back and starts studying this Judiciary Act of 1789, and he comes across something called a Writ of Mandamus. Basically, the Writ of Mandamus is simply the power that the courts hold to be able to force someone, to compel someone to do something. So the Writ of Mandamus granted the Supreme Court this power by the United States Congress so that they can force someone to do something, okay? So basically, Marbury turns to his Federalist friend, John Marshall, and says, Marshall, you got to hook me up here. I want my job back. Marshall totally knows that he should have the job. Marshall had the appointment in his hand, just didn't get it to him in time. Now, you got to understand, this looks pretty simple, like a slam dunk, but you have to go back into what is happening on the other end. Jefferson is now in control of the country as far as the president goes, and both Congress and the president send the Supreme Court home for a year. And it's like a threat. It's basically them saying to them, hey, listen, check this out. You either learn to play ball with us and put politics aside, or your suspension may be for good. This is some really spooky stuff, guys. I mean, we are talking about a president giving a timeout to 1/3 of the United States government. That's an awful lot of power for one person to hold. And don't get me wrong, I mean, it wasn't just the president who made this decision, it was the president and Congress, but hopefully this rings some bells if you think back to the French Revolution, where the nobility and clergy teamed up against the peasants and basically said, you know what, you guys don't have say anymore. Jefferson is willing to double down on this too. He even goes as far as saying, hey, look, if Marshall decides that, as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, that he's going to rule against me, I'll flat out refuse. As President of the United States, I don't have to do what the Supreme Court tells me. That's a terrifying thought in itself. So let's get into what Marshall said. Okay, Marshall sits down and says, okay, essentially this boils down to 3 questions. Is there legal harm being done to Marbury? That's the first question that he asks. And, he says, yeah, there actually is legal harm. What Jefferson did, throwing out those appointments, it's illegal. Okay, so let's go to the next question. Is there a legal remedy, something that can be done through the law for Marbury's injuries? And we're not talking about bodily injury, just, that's the way that we're going to term it, the things that were done wrong to him. And Marshall again finds for his Federalist friend. He says, yeah, because Marbury didn't get his job like he was supposed to, he's got a right to go ahead and sue Jefferson. So, again, of the 3 questions, it already looks really, really bad. These 2 Federalists are hanging out with each other. Everybody kind of assumes, well, the Federalists are going to go against the Democratic Republicans on this one. Jefferson's going to lose. And when Marshall reaches the last question, that's where there's a problem. When he asks, can the Supreme Court do anything about it? This is where Marshall kind of shocks the country. Essentially, Marshall goes back and starts examining the Judiciary Act. And he says, actually, the Judiciary Act, which granted us that power, that writ of mandamus, where we can force someone to do something, is unconstitutional. Now, I know I may lose you here, but here's the idea. That power was given to the Supreme Court by Congress. And Marshall says that's unconstitutional. If 1/3 of our government can give power to any other branch of the government, that's a terrifying thing, because if they can give it, they can also take it away. So we are talking about, any branch of government becoming too powerful. Marshall recognizes this right away, and he says we've got to be very, very careful here. You guys, hopefully, after sitting through class this year, know there's only one way that power can be granted to any branch of the government of the United States. There's only one thing that actually spells out the powers, and it doesn't come from Congress. It actually comes from the Constitution itself. Marshall essentially says the writ of mandamus that was issued in the Judiciary Act conflicts with the powers outlined in Article 3 of the Constitution. Now, if you've forgotten, remember, less relations are super rad. That LES, the first S, stands for Supreme Court. That was your Article 3 that said that, look, Article 3 deals with the powers of the Supreme Court, and it didn't say anything about a writ of mandamus there. Marshall has to turn to his Federalist friend Marbury and say, bro, this time I can't help you out. I cannot violate the Constitution. So it is this event right here, from this point forward, that the Supreme Court kind of figures out that, you know what, our main job is going to be judicial review, making sure that laws passed by either Congress or the President follow the Constitution and do not violate it. So there you go. Hopefully that made a little bit of sense. It was a little bit over 10 minutes. I know, we took a little bit longer going over this in class. So like always, if you guys have any questions, please come and see me. And other than that, we'll catch you next time.